My name is David Coffey. I'm Vice President of Research and Development. We're here at Forcepoint. I'm responsible for running teams that build the firewall that you just saw, cloud access security brokers, the web filtering from the cloud perspective, the email security protection from the cloud perspective, as well as the email and web appliance. Okay. So what I thought would be good today was just kind of go through an area of what we were doing with a release that's coming out really soon from the Web Security Gateway, okay? But specifically talking through the CASB features that are integrated into the Web Security Gateway, as well as what we've done with integrating Web Security Gateway with our CASB cloud service and actually collapsing these markets, how to bring that together. So what you've heard today is you've heard from Dr. Ford, talking through how we're looking at the intersection between human behavior and data and the ability to do protections around actually securing those attributes. You've heard Jim go through the aspects of the brains behind the behavioral and the analytics conversation about being able to pull together multiple attributes coming in from a variety of our products. And as we continue to integrate those brains with our products, that becomes a much more powerful conversation. And then from this perspective, how we've integrated CASB, which was an acquisition we made last February, already with a number of different products, and how we're bringing this combination together to provide a much better security model for our customers. Okay. So I'm not going to go through, in the interest of time, talking through how the boundaries are erasing. Right? I think we know that. We're part of this room. We're using a lot of those cloud services together right now. But from a security perspective, there's a bit of a conflict, right? Security likes control. Security likes understanding. Security likes boundaries. Security likes definitions, right? And making those definitions. And, you know, with today's services that are out there, these are great tools. And the great tools, people want to use these. And so we know they want to use these. And so how do you start bringing these together from enablement perspective? So you can enable people to use these tools, use them in a secure fashion, get better visibility around things. So cloud access security brokers, right, as Gartner would coin the term, is a mechanism that sits between users and consumers of a cloud service and the cloud service itself, and be able to inject levels of control, whether it be security or policy around what can and cannot be done based around the protocols itself around that cloud service. The cloud services, whether it be Salesforce.com, whether it be Office 365, Gmail, et cetera. Okay? Now, what you get is, one, the visibility into what's going on, right? Understanding how people are utilizing these services, the data going up and down, the data going in and out, and how files and data are being transferred to other people, under individuals, other systems and services. You also want to have basic hygiene around this. As the data flows, it may not stay clean, depending upon where it's coming from or going to. And so you want to make sure that basic hygiene is enforced, right?
How do you insert yourself between a BYOB user and Salesforce?
So from a BYOB user, there's a couple different ways, right? One is through an enrollment conversation. I think that's obvious. The other one is through APIs. So we support the API model of deployment as well, talking about flexible models of deployment. So we can access a lot of cloud services through the APIs to understand who and how have put files where, and then understand what that data is, as well as how they're reading it. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but it's not what I thought you were describing, where you were in the path between the user.
We support both models.
David,
so there's
actually a third one. So one of the other things that we can do is we have the ability to essentially, if you're using an IAM provider, we have the ability to work with the IAM provider to essentially only allow incoming requests to come from certain hosts. And also to make sure that if the user is trying to log, so let's say a person is directly trying to go to Salesforce.com. What we can do is, if we have told Salesforce.com that's not allowed, you can only come in through Okta.com because we want you to go through our IAM provider, we can configure it to force you to go through Okta. By doing that, we then have the ability to, ensure that we're able to track you essentially the same way. So there's a few different mechanisms that exist.
Yeah.
Well, to clarify that one more, you guys just basically hook into the SAS's SSO provider.
Well, you can use your
You
own.
become the provider. You hook into it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And obviously through the inline mechanism as well, depending upon how you get through the inline.
What happens if you have a failure in your own infrastructure and your API access to Salesforce.com goes away temporarily? There's your relationship to Salesforce, you're sitting on top or in between me and Salesforce, basically. What happens if you have a failure?
So
Because you're both the control plane and the data plane.
that's correct. Okay, there's a couple of things that happen. One is that if we have a failure, then there is a failure. Okay, there are a number of things that we put in place in order to prevent failures, and one of them is distribution, a fault tolerance, and high availability for our customer bases, as well as a very rich set of monitoring in place in order to ensure that this connectivity is active. And if not, then the notification goes out for the customers. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's fine. It was the question.
Yeah.
And that's, the technology is the technology.
Yeah, the technology is the technology. I mean, as you're building cloud services, they need to operate as a utility on the internet, right? People pay the bill, lights go on and off. It's the same conversation from a cloud perspective. So the cloud services have to be built to effectively a 5.9 and up discussion standpoint, especially for interrupt level services. There are some services that operate asynchronously, like email, for example, right? An interrupt on a fraction of a second from an email slide or slow down is relatively minimal impact, right? From a web browsing perspective, you introduce half a second latency on a web browsing conversation, you're in a very different world.
So this probably should be able to go without saying, but let's state the obvious or ask the obvious question. Why do I need a CASB product, not just your product, any product, CASB? Why can't I build it myself? Is it a relationship issue with the SAS providers? Is it just an issue of scale? What's the issue that I can't build a equivalent CASB solution?
So that's a good conversation, right? Because DIY, there are a lot of people that can build many different things. Why would you want to utilize somebody else's CASB service? One, there is a wealth of researchers that are actively ongoing and engaged with these providers to make sure that the protocols are constantly updated and digestible so that the policy enforcements can be highly granular. Okay, so it's not just a brute force. It's not like a web security where you're looking at a domain or even a URL perspective. You're looking at the activity and the data that's going up and down, right? CASB also integrates, our CASB integrates with our data loss prevention service as well. And so if you think about this one from the perspective of CASB is looking at a broker to access, right, working with the identity access management solution, as well as the granular capabilities or what can and cannot be done on those cloud application services, utilizing the world-class DLP service that we have to do the classification of the data itself, and then enabling further policies around the classification of that data. And doing that seamlessly, whether it happened on roaming users in the cloud through the CASB service, as well as on-prem within enterprises using those the same DLP engines.
That's where the secret sauce comes in, though, and the advantage of using a CASB provider, right? It's about that expertise of being able to watch the emerging threat models and fine-tuning the product to adapt, which is your bread and butter. That's what you're the expert in doing. And from a technical perspective, like, it's not the building the solution, keeping it operational in-house that would be tricky. It's the keeping up with the threat analytics and fine-tuning that product to make sure that it is handling the threats it needs to. It's not just brokering verifying that you are allowed to have access from device X to cloud service Y. It's, all the stuff that can happen in the middle.
I don't normally throw softballs, but when I do, they're good.
Really soft. I'll try to hit them. I'll try to hit.
So
Yeah.
your CASB is cloud-based.
Yes.
And also you have an on-site
Yes, we do.
component.
That's correct.
So the SSO plugin would be going to the cloud, so uptime, downtime, if the on-site one goes around, you still have the cloud to back you up.
We support the full roaming model for that reason.
And you keep
yep.
all the, I mean, this again is back to my original question I asked moments before you guys got here. What SaaS providers do you provide support for? Because I'm assuming it's not all 20,000 that are out there.
We're improving it all the time. It's one of those content creation discussion standpoints, so there's an operations model behind that. I think from a marketing perspective, the last number I remember is something north of 6,000. Is that about right? Okay.
You recognize all 6,000 and do something with them, or you just say, we can...
Okay, that's a good conversation. Obviously, some of them are deeper than others. Okay, that is true. For the most part, all of them are recognized in that fashion, and we support the rudimentary basis of up, down, and where the data is going around the data classification. The other things that we do is we work with customers when they have customized SaaS applications themselves, for very large customers, and build new engines exactly for them.
Okay. And what happens if there's a SaaS provider you don't recognize? Are you going to allow it or disallow it, or say, hey, let me start this workflow up that says...
We enable policies to make those decisions, so customers can actually pull that trigger if they want to.
Okay.
Okay.
And then my last question is about data exfiltration. Let's say I'm on Salesforce, and what happens is a lot of times when people are leaving a company, they're going to try to download everything from Salesforce. A lot of people can do that. It is my job to download things.
Yep.
How do you know if I'm downloading too much?
So you were really skipping ahead in this conversation.
Sorry. I can wait.
Tell 'em.
I can wait.
So, it's fine, actually. I mean, this is the conversation just based off of time. Covering things verbally is perfectly adequate. The cloud service supports a user behavior and analytics program, specifically focused on recognizing risk and probability, as well as anomalous behavior of different types of transactions like bandwidth, size, locations, et cetera, around that. You saw Jim go through in-depth details of a very good detailed engine around this. So the ones that's provided in CASB is pretty much a canned set of reports and capabilities around doing some of those behaviors. And then integration would have to happen with UEBA in order to enable those deeper areas to take place.
So you have a UEBA basically in the cloud
That's
that
correct.
would talk to my on-site one that would allow me to do more.
Through other services that we have, yes.
Okay, that's cool.
That is correct.
I like that.
Okay. And that's kind of how it all comes together, right? You're looking at this from a data flow, or you create a story around the data, whether it be users interfacing with the data, people utilizing cloud services and tools to do productive work, and threats that are built by the adversaries to take advantage of this new technology that's coming into the world. And some of those adversaries, they're very smart. The techniques they use are sometimes unique. And if you don't have the capability to put together some of those incremental stories, those pieces of the fingerprints per se, you're not going to be able to pull that all together for the customers and ultimately provide that security protection, right? On top of the insider threat and everything else that we've talked to today.
Now, do you trap all the Amazon services like Lambda and so forth as well?
I'm not sure about Lambda. I have to get back to you on that one, and I'm sorry about that one. I should know that.
Because, I mean, I'm thinking about services that I'm programming today that will use Lambda to do a bunch of analysis for me. I could be uploading the wrong data.
Well, yes, and the serverless applications, those types of services themselves that are done on the other cloud infrastructure providers, those are very interesting.
So what would be interesting to hear, and some of this stuff might be, because I haven't run into a lot of people who are actually thinking about this in the enterprise, but other than Ed.
Well, Ed's not a lot, he's just one.
And everybody I represent.
So obviously, from a CASB perspective, you guys can interface with the AWS, and your bread and butter is the AWS API and saying, this is how I control data flow in AWS. In the enterprise data center, you're saying, I control, for lack of a better methodology, data via firewalls, DLP, et cetera. There's a point where the two marry.
Yep.
And there's unevenness that the traditional firewall vendors have not been able to answer, which is, how do I create a consistent policy across my entire enterprise by saying this workload cannot talk to this AWS service and not have to go separately into the AWS control panel to configure that, and then into my firewall to also do that. Seems like you guys have all the data plane covered and the two separate control planes. Do those control planes talk to one another?
So talking conversation integrations, this is one of those items that's been a theme throughout our discussion standpoints. So what I'm going to tell you is that this is a very interesting use case. And that next-gen firewall, as we have it, is also deployable on the Azure marketplace as well as on the AWS marketplace, as well as internally within infrastructure that people have within data centers. That's a great conversation that maybe we can have later after this meeting.
Looking forward to it.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to skip through this because I know we're running low on time, but from our web securities gateway perspective, one of the first areas of understanding cloud access security brokers was getting a feel for that shadow IT. Okay, that's a bread and butter discussion standpoint for what that is. I think we all know this problem set. We then moved into how do we block the unsanctioned apps, right? So these are the cloud applications like PDF converters and file uploads and being able to drop files for later on conversations, okay? And what we're doing, or will be shortly releasing in version 8.5, is a very highly granular controls around these CASB, and then integrating that seamlessly with our CASB cloud service as well. Okay, so it's implemented locally within the data centers from the web security customers that we have, and then also seamlessly leveraging the cloud access security broker services that we have around the planet. Okay?
Can you explain how you determine what is a high-risk app? I'm assuming it's a high-risk SaaS.
It's a high-risk SaaS app, yes, correct.
So how do you determine it's high risk?
We do the other apps differently for the different products, but yes. We have research and development teams that are actively understanding the types of behaviors that would be recognized for these types of applications, as well as classification of these applications. And almost all of our content around the classification of SaaS apps also include pros and cons, so that administrators can also further make decisions around, no, this is risky for me, even though it might not be risky for everybody else. I'm just going to run into the video. Are we good with that? Okay. If this works. Okay. So this is about a 5-minute video. This is going to cover the basic conversations of how do we log into the web security gateway. This is a demo of our yet to be released product that will be imminently launched. And this is the dashboard for what this looks like. Now, as part of the deployments of the 8.5, what you'll see is a basic understanding of the applications. And this is just happening as the traffic is going to the proxy. Okay, so as the traffic is processing to the proxy, the classification engines are basically digesting these protocols, and they're looking at things from the risk level of the application itself. So this is a high-risk application. The high-risk application, you see the pros and the cons. The cons are relatively larger compared against the pros. And they've got a number of those items in there of being able to upload files, things like this in an unprotected fashion, and what those types of details are. Okay. There's a variety of different ways that we can slice this data. And one of the other areas to take a look at is just from an administrative user capability is by looking at this from a user's viewpoint as well. So this is one of the SAS applications viewpoint is over here. And the next one is around the user's viewpoint. Really kind of hone in and understand better about not just what type of activity people are doing in aggregate, but also the individual users and if there are classifications of risky behavior that you're looking at or unrisky behavior just based off of different type of transaction amounts, quantities, things like that. And just looking at this user's capability, user's history here, what you've got is you've got an overall classification where the number of requests, it's a histogram, right? Fairly standard, fairly common. And then you've got quantity on the right. Now, I'm not going to go through orchestrated methodology around security issues, attacks, and other items here from that perspective. This is just a display of the type of information and flow that is available to the administrators that contain this type of data, okay? And from there, you can still drop down into the, just give me the level of details of these cloud applications for this user and be able to further drop down from there, all right? And then bring this back into groups and other areas within the web security gateway, which has been around. Now, getting into the overall CASB configuration discussion standpoint, what we've got is we get into, these are the applications. These are the applications that we effectively support within the deployment so that you can say, you can and cannot go to some of these that'll be done in a different area. But if you're allowed to go to Dropbox, then I want you to start protecting your capabilities to go on Dropbox. Okay, does that make sense?
And that, in this case, that Dropbox is the corporate Dropbox because you're hooked into the SSO interface, right?
Yes, that's right.
And then someplace else on the firewall, I have to say, and don't let this guy go to his personal Dropbox
Right.
either.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. And yeah, and it's one of those items where you don't know what you don't know, right? To go through things, but from this perspective, these are the areas that we absolutely do know. And by tying in Dropbox at this level, you can get into that highly granular capabilities and then further go through policies. And so
Yeah, as long as Dropbox makes the
Yes.
corporate and the private have different names so
They
that
have to.
I can't
Right.
allow access to the
Right.
corporate.
Yeah,
and
some
block the
enterprises
private.
have problems with GitHub for that reason, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so the web security gateway seamlessly tied SSO into the Cloud Access Security Broker, which is in the cloud conversation, and then going through things from a Dropbox perspective, being able to identify certain behaviors. This one was a file upload. It was blocked. And effectively, now you've got roaming user coverage. You've got flexible deployments, and you've got seamlessly integrated CASB and the power of CASB from the cloud perspective with your web security gateway.
Is there one place to set policy for all these tools? Or do I have to set them in each one?
One place you have to set policy on this one is migrated up.
So if I set it locally, it gets
If you
migrated
set it
out.
locally, areas will move up. If you want to get into deeper capabilities and highly flexible, then you are going to have to go to this dashboard for the current time being. But just keep in mind that the CASB acquisition happened last February, and from an integration standpoint, we are heavily integrating from this discussion standpoint, and that is a 1 + 1 equals greater than 2 discussion. Okay, is that fair?
Yeah.
The only other thing that I'll leave you with is going back to where I was talking about the user behavior analytics from the cloud access security broker, is that this is a high-level aspect of the risks around the users based off of the type of behavior that they're doing, as well as other attributes within the system. Okay? And this is just the starting point from a behavior analytics perspective within CASB. And then obviously, as we further flesh out the integration with the tool set that Jim went through earlier, it'll get richer and richer and richer.